So I'm going to talk a bit about phased implementation and market readiness. It's basically about the process of ETS implementation, some of the steps that need to be taken, and two different approaches for implementation, a pilot phase and gradual implementation. Some of that we also heard already in previous sessions, so I will skip some slides. Yeah, first looking at ETS implementation as an evolutionary process. So in general, as we already heard in several other sessions, it's a good idea to treat ETS policy design and also institutions as an evolutionary process that evolves over time. Change over time as the system matures is necessary and also desirable. It's a regular part of ETS policy implementation. And the main objectives are to respond to changing circumstances in the economy, but also politically, incorporating lessons learned and maintaining credibility and effectiveness of the policy through these adjustments. So in general, three broad phases of ETS implementation can be identified. First one is a pre-implementation. That's the phase that Thailand is still currently in. So data collection, institution building, and establishing the regulatory and administrative framework, all the steps that need to be taken before a system is launched. Then there's a pilot phase or a phased launch. So when the system first starts, becomes operational, that's a period for testing all the design choices, the institutions, learning, having first experiences, and building capacity for everyone involved. And then finally, the full implementation and review. That's basically when you enter the full operation of a system. That should be a process of continual improvement and adaptation, as is the case in all the established ETSs through regular reviews. Yeah, here again, I summed up some of the different aspects of ETS implementation that need to happen prior to an ETS launch. So there's a first block on a technical preparation and ETS design. That involves development of ETS laws and regulations, what we heard from DCCC on the first day, development of guidelines for regulated entities, and also expert advice and consultation on the design. Second important element is data collection. That pertains primarily to MRV. Getting the databases right is a precondition for setting the cap and setting targets, and also supporting capacity building for that purpose. Third block is building the administrative and institutional framework. So very important to establish the institutions that will be implementing the policy, including registry and trading platform, and providing training and simulations for those actors. And finally, building capacity, which is what we're doing here this week, and also engaging with the relevant stakeholders, of course, sharing knowledge with other jurisdictions and other international actors involved in this field, and capacity building beyond government, so to also address industry and other market actors. Yeah, here a bit more detailed, what I already mentioned, regulatory and institutional framework. Most importantly is the legal basis. This is where the draft climate law would be situated here in Thailand. Then once that is in place, there's all kinds of secondary legislation and regulation that needs to be drafted, including guidelines for methods and procedures, so that's all the regulatory elements that need to be defined for a system to be actually implemented, MRV, compliance, trading rules, and finally establishing the institutions that will be needed for ETS implementation. The most important of these is the regulator, an administrative body that is in charge of the ETS implementation. In Germany, for example, there's a designated government agency from the federal government, the German Emissions Trading Authority, who we heard of on the first day already. That is the national designated agency to implement the ETS. The registry needs to be managed by an operator, also the trading platform, and other service providers such as verifiers, and in many cases also private consultancies that are engaged in ETS implementation, doing some of the work for regulated entities. Building capacity, this should happen at different levels. So at the level of the government, building administrative and technical capacity to implement ETS. It's what we're doing this week and also in other contexts. Also at the level of regulated entities, the ETS participants, most importantly on MRV, which is the precondition for a system to run, but also on trading and compliance later on. And also there should be some capacity building about abatement options, industry specific, because this is what we're actually ultimately aiming for with an ETS. The same goes for supporting institutions that I already mentioned. Yeah, before compliance or trading can start, a fully operational MRV must be in place. Just to underscore that, this is the most important point in the beginning. Yeah, on MRV specifically, in many systems, there has been mandatory reporting without compliance obligations as a first step prior to the ETS launch in order to build capacity for MRV. If I remember correctly from the DCCE presentation, that is also planned in Thailand to start with a monitoring requirement. That, of course, has benefits, including improving the quality of emissions data, informing decisions on allocation, cap setting, and testing first administrative mechanisms for MRV before the actual system starts. An example for that is South Korea, where they introduced as a first step a mandatory reporting scheme called the Target Management System that ran for 3 years with mandatory reporting for the entities that would later be covered by the ETS, and individual compliance targets were already in place for allocation and surrender, but no trading yet. So this was an initial step to get the system in place and get the actors familiar with it before the final ETS design was then launched in 2015. Looking at pilot phases, what is an ETS pilot? It's a mandatory program that is explicitly framed as a testing and learning period with a clear end date and a clear signal that the system might significantly change after the pilot ends. So that's one option to implement ETS, is to start with this really designated pilot that has certain design focused on testing the policies, methodologies, and institutions, and should primarily allow to collect experiences, identify problems that could come up, and also things like conflicts with existing legislation that could be apparent. Also to build capacity, of course, and to demonstrate the effectiveness the system. When designing a pilot, there are a few design choices as well that need to be taken. The length, so usually it's between 1 and 3 or 4 years, depending on the state of development, what is foreseen. What should be the coverage? So you can start a pilot only with a select group of sectors, perhaps those where the data quality is best or that have the largest capacity to participate, or it could be system-wide. Allocation, that should be the method that will first be used in the final ETS should be tested through a pilot. Also on the cap, there's a decision to be taken whether there should be very lenient cap without immediate pressure to abate, or a bit more ambitious. Whether there should be enforcement already in the pilot phase. And one important question is also whether units that were allocated in the pilot should then be carried over into the final ETS or not. Also connected to the other design factors, because of course that has implications for the final system. One important factor about a pilot is managing expectations, because it should really be communicated to the stakeholders and the participants as a trial and testing phase, where lessons will be learned and changes will be made for the final ETS, because there is a risk of damaging confidence in the system if there are certain flaws that lead the pilot to be unsuccessful or not to work well. So communicating this clearly and managing the expectations is important, not to damage the credibility of the tool itself. An example for a pilot approach to an ETS is China, and we will hear a case study from Hongming just after my presentation. Are there any questions so far?
Trading platform on the exchange, or we just let them do OTC?
I think not necessarily. It depends. Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so for the pilot phase, I wonder if we really need to have a trading platform at the stock exchange ready for the trading, because there will be very little trading during that phase. Maybe we just allow them to do OTC. Yes.
Yeah, I think that is correct. So usually it's primarily about testing allocation and surrendering, and there could be some direct trade. But yeah, if the system is just starting, then usually there's not much trading activity anyway, and that was also the case in the EU ETS for quite a while. Then I'll continue with gradual implementation, which is the other option to start in ETS. So the difference is that you would start with a basic policy design, which is not framed as a pilot. So it has not this clear trial character, but basically starting with the basic elements that need to be fully in place, and then improving and adapting the system as it continues. It applies the intended long-term policy design from the outset. So all the key design questions need to be resolved prior to that, including scope and coverage, the allocation methods, initially at least, and the cap. Whereas other design elements could be phased in progressively as the system matures, such as auctioning, for example, which is usually not there from the very beginning. The main benefit is that this puts in place an effective carbon price sooner than through a pilot. and still manages the complexity by starting with the basic design. Yeah, another benefit is that it provides more planning certainty for regulated entities, because unlike a pilot, all the key design choices were already made. So there is a clear signal that the system will continue, whereas with a pilot, it's dependent on the results. And also in many cases that we've seen in other countries, there has been a pilot that then kind of got stuck due to political changes of government. Whereas with gradual implementation, usually there's a higher degree of certainty that is being provided to the market actors that the price signal will continue. The precondition for that, as I mentioned, is that the regulatory, administrative, and institutional framework to design and implement the system needs to be fully in place before that can start, which is a bit more demanding than with a pilot. So there's more work to be done prior than with a pilot. An example of that is the EU ETS, the first trading phase that ran from 2005 to 2007. That was not officially labeled a pilot, but essentially functioned as one. And from there on, the EU ETS gradually expanded, phased in more elements, and reformed with different phases that were also increasing in length. So the first one was only 2 years, then it was 4 years. And the current phase, phase 4, is for a period of 10 years. So as the system became more established, also the periods became longer to provide more certainty and opportunity to plan to the regulated entities. Yeah, some of the elements that can be phased in gradually, I listed here, such as scope and coverage. So starting with only the largest emitters and sectors with the best data quality, then expanding that over time. Same for the cap. It could start very generously and should then be tightened in line with the NDC targets. Allocation methods usually move from free allocation only, using grandparenting. That's in almost all cases used in the very beginning, moving to benchmarking, and then finally introduction of auctioning, at least partially. Also price stability measures and offset can be phased in as the system continues. Benefits include capacity building, testing the features. Main difference to the pilot is that an effective carbon price is put in place earlier to avoid delays of abatement, to set the signal earlier. Time for adjustments in interlinked regulatory frameworks, such as energy markets, through the phased implementation. There are some challenges that should be considered when moving from a pilot or an early phase to the final phase. One is reduced environmental impact. So when the first phase has narrow coverage, for example, or a very lenient cap, that of course translates into limited abatement, and on that the expectations should be managed not to undermine the credibility. There could also be a carbon leakage risk if the scope is very narrow. So economic activity could shift from covered to uncovered sectors depending on what the exact scope is. There have also been some cases of front-loading high-emission activities in sectors where there has been an announcement that these would be covered in ETS in the future. Political expectations and lock-in. Basically, if a system starts with very lenient rules, like a very lenient cap and low prices, that can lead to high resistance from regulated entities, in some cases also from political actors, to then tighten the system in the future. To manage these risks, most existing ETSs have very clearly defined phases with a clear duration during which they run, and after that, scheduled policy reviews that allow for policy adjustment and reforms to be implemented. So explicitly setting these kind of interim periods where changes can be discussed and then implemented going forward. Yeah, to wrap up very briefly, looking at the EU ETS again, at phase one, the very early one, that was not formally designated as a pilot, but essentially functioned as one, with features such as limited penalties for non-compliance, so a bit more lenient to let market actors get familiar with the system. The EU also decided that there would be no banking of allowances into phase two, so they basically used it really as a testing phase, a bit what we did yesterday in the simulation, so to allow the system to run, but then kind of restart in phase two when it comes to the allocated allowances, explicitly an experimental character. At the time, it covered only the energy and heavy industry sectors, around 11,500 installations. And as we also heard from Irini on the second day, the allocation in this first phase was kind of a bottom-up approach through the member states via national allocation plans. So there was no clearly defined cap in advance at that time. That also led to over-allocation in most countries, so there were more allowances in circulation than the cap, which eventually caused the prices to drop almost to zero. That was then changed in the later phases. Yeah, over-allocation, that was kind of the end result of the first phase. So through this exercise, testing and learning revealed that allowances exceeded actual emissions, which then, as you would expect, caused the prices to drop and fall to almost zero by 2007, which was essentially a policy failure at the time. But it also allowed the EU to use this learning, the verified data, to make to respond to that and make the changes to improve that in the following phases. It also proved that the market mechanics worked. So firms were buying and selling allowances. Price signal was forming despite the over-allocation. And the EU registry operated at scale, so testing and getting experience for the institutions. Political and institutional learning took place, so all institutions involved, the regulator, the industry, and also markets gained first-hand experience of how the system worked, which in the process reduced uncertainty and helped to build acceptance for the reforms that followed. Then just to wrap up, key messages. Implementing an ETS is a complex and a gradual process. There are many different steps that need to be taken, and milestones in this process build upon each other. So it should really be approached as a step-by-step approach. Most jurisdictions choose phased implementation of the ETSs to allow for a gradual phase-in and a trial period to collect experience and feedback. That can either be done through a pilot, so an explicitly framed testing and learning period that has a clear end date, where expectations should be managed, or this gradual implementation approach where the basic policy design and institutions need to be fully in place, and then reforms can be implemented from there on gradually. Both of these approaches have the key objectives to allow for building of capacity, collecting feedback and lessons learned, also improving data quality and retaining the flexibility in scope for policy adjustment and reforms, while still providing some certainty and credibility to regulated entities. Any questions?
อันนี้ก็จะเป็นส่วนที่เกี่ยวข้องกับสเต็ปการดำเนินงานเนาะซึ่งที่ทางที่อองพูดมาก็จะเป็นภาพรวมใหญ่ๆนะครับมีคำถามอีกไหม Okay, so thank you all. Next I'm gonna invite So next I'm gonna invite Hong Min from the EDF China to share us the China ETS case study. ตัว PowerPoint อัปโหลดแล้วนะฮะของฮอมมินถ้าใครโหลดไปก่อนหน้านี้ก็เข้าไปเช็คใหม่
Good afternoon, everyone. See me again. And thanks for Leon's sharing the details of the EU and also mentioning a little bit about the China ETS. And like I said, I think China ETS is still best practice and can be learned by Southeast countries, including Thailand, because not only like China and Southeast countries like Thailand in Asia, and also we are in most closely status like the developing countries and economic regions. So that has a lot of details can be shared and learned. But I think in generally, the phasing implementation would be learned, but the details still need to be considered. So in my PPT, I didn't share too much the detail progress I can touch, but I can touch verbally because I think the digital status needs to be really considered because like in China, currently the political landscape is still like a one-party ruled country. And also because China is like still promise and still have a strong political will on progressing on for the environmental protection and also for the climate change. So which has built up a really strong legal political momentum for making everything happen. And also the political landscape in China would be different from like in China from different to the other countries. So I think I just want to mention this and to see and introduce more details later. And we can see for the China national ETS, actually not only the China national ETS, but also for the China's carbon market. Actually, in China, for now, it's already been formed a carbon market system, which is the combined the compliance market and the voluntary market, which is so-called the China certified emission reduction. But to be honestly, in our mind as EDF, we believe even the name of the CCR still named as China certified emission reduction or internationally still be called as the voluntary emission reduction program, but it's not the real voluntary emission reduction or the voluntary carbon market like the usual ones. So whereas I'm listing here as the crediting system because the CCR is actually like the Thailand voluntary market is like backed up by the government. And for now, the CSR is only using domestically for compliance purpose or domestic companies offset purpose, not used internationally. So that's more like domestic accrediting system for now. But definitely in the future, the CSR would consider like linking with Corsia, but that's the next step. So for here, we're seeing that's the two track is the ETS and the accrediting system. Both of them are actually gradually developed and also in a phases development process. For example, for the compliance market, it's starting from the pilot phases from 2011 until 2014. All the pilots are established, and as of today, all the 7 pilots are still existing. And starting from 2020, later on, we can see that. But the implementation of the China National ETS actually starting from 2017 to 2021. And then the operation of the China National ETS starting from 2021 to 2024. Now, starting from this year last year is actually starting from for the expansion. And also for the accrediting system, definitely like Thailand, China has the experience with the CDM. So that's why China started the CCR program in 2012. And then between 2012 to 2017, there was the first phase of the CCR program, which is because of the end of the Kyoto Protocol, there's a lot of China's project registered in the CDM system. So China's government is just trying to continue the momentum and the trend that broadening the China activities or actions towards climate change. So they build up the CSR program. And by then, actually, it's a link back to the China pilots because during the first phase of the CSR program, all the China ETS pilots has been implemented. And all of them has the offset linking with the CCR, which are most of them are allowing the key emitting entities to use certain percentage of the CCERs to offset their compliance obligation. But due to some data and upgrading after the Paris Agreement in place, so actually China suspended the CCR program after 2017. And starting from 2020, actually the end of 2023, the CSR program started to back online, and the trading started from 2024 until now. It's already been the second phase of the CSR program, which is really new because the prior CSR program was like a copy paste from CDM with like 200 more methodologies and a lot of like 1,300 more projects registered. But now it's only like 18 methodologies in the system, and only 20 million CSRs are issued in the new system right now. So let's see a little bit details on the ETS. So like I said, there was the major dual track of the development of the two markets. But regarding the compliance market, actually starting from the pilot phase, but definitely even we divided as 3 phases, but actually in each of the phases, there are sub-phases like Liam was introduced, because of when you establishing the local or the ETS pilots, you need to do the capacity building to analyze the thresholds and to build the infrastructure, which is the registry and the trading platform. And also you need to in place your legislation and then kick off the tradings. So I won't touch all the details, but I will briefly, verbally to introduce that. So actually local ETS in China, or the pilots in China, was like 7 plus 1. The 7 original pilots was in Beijing, Tianjin, Chongqing, Hubei, Shenzhen, Guangdong, and Sichuan. Sorry, not Sichuan. I think that's already the 7. And that's the pilots. But all of the pilots they have their own characteristic. just for instance, like in Hubei, originally the covering threshold was like equal to current national ETS threshold is like 26,000 ton of the company's emitting emissions per year. With that threshold, all the company in Hubei province will be covered under the pilot ETS. But like in Beijing and Shenzhen and also Tianjin, because they are only the Hubei is a province in China, which is included a lot of high emission entities like the iron and steel companies, manufacturers, like also petrochemical and chemical factories. So, but like in other pilots, for example, like I said, Beijing, Tianjin, and Shenzhen, they are like municipal level cities. It's not like large scale like Hubei. So most of them are not have like heavy duty or high emission entities in there. So their starting threshold is much lower than Hubei. Like in Beijing, Tianjin, and Shenzhen, especially Beijing and Shenzhen, for now, it's like 3,000 ton per year or annually emissions. The entity will be covered by their own or their pilot ETS. So this is like really designed based on their pilots or their jurisdiction level status. And also because of this threshold, we can see that in Beijing and Shenzhen, they are covering more the narrowed down sector, like buildings or transportations are covered. But in general, in national ETS and also in Hubei, they're not covering like transportation and not covering the buildings yet because their threshold definitely more higher. But with the timing past, actually the starting threshold for Hubei was 26,000. But since last or two years ago, or it's already been updated to 13,000 ton per year for their emission threshold. So which is they are trying to covering more because of the implementation of China National ETS. The China National ETS has regulations explicitly saying that when the China National ETS is covering certain industries, the certain industries will be no longer be covered by the pilot ETS. So which means now the national ETS is covering the power, aluminum, cement, and iron steel. So all these four sectors are not covered by the local or the pilot ETS. So which means this is also one of the reasons that Hubei is like narrowed down or deduct their thresholds for including more sectors. But also the others for the pilot ETS is like they also build up a lot of experience for China National ETS to learn or to consider. For example, at the beginning of some of the pilot ETS, they were using the allowance allocation method like grandfathering, which is just considering its own company's historical emissions and comparing with its own historical emissions to facilitate more emission reductions. But some of them were implementing the benchmark allocation methodology, which is in place for the national ETS in China. So then eventually China actually started to use the benchmark methodology, the benchmark approach for allocate the emission allowances. So these are the accumulated experience by the pilots, and also regarding like the auctions. Regarding the 7 pilots, it's not like all the 7 pilots are free allocated the allowance at the beginning. Like Guangdong province, they requiring like 2% to 5% emission auctions annually. But the others are like free allocated their allowances at the beginning, but they also choose, some of them are choosing like using the auction as supplementary for the for adjusting the allowance need, like MSR. So this is a lot of experience that I accumulated by the pilots, but for now, like I said, all the pilots are still existing and still as really the piloting for the China National ETS to implementing further, because for now, for example, in Shanghai, they're already covering the shipping sector in their pilot in their pilots, which is not been announced and planned to be covered by the China National ETS yet. So which is really the trying to piloting, and also there's a lot of exploration for discussing like financial instruments in the pilots. So they are accumulated a lot. But definitely, I think in Thailand, because China is really huge, so China choose like 7 pilots for operating in this particular, and also with the timing issue, because like we can see that for the China ETS pilots has been started 15 years ago. So given the time framing and also the scale issues, I don't think I think Thailand need to more consider how to really do the pilots, like Leon also saying. I think gradually implementing and slowly developing it might be a more good way as a piloting. And then the next phase is the national ETS. Because of the build-up of the pilot ETS in China from 2011, then all the 7 pilots successfully announced their implementation since 2013. So then from 2015, China has already been started to build up its own ETS. But we can see here from this timeline, the build-up of the China national ETS is not starting from legislation, but definitely starting from legislation, because at the beginning, the legislation has been already been considered back into 2014, but it's not in place until the end of 2017 for their ministry level regulation. And then actually the national management decree or the state council level regulation was fully enforced just like in 2024. So, but meanwhile, actually China is more starting was the MRV, which is the data collection. We can see starting from 2015, that's the sub-phases for China ETS implementation was like China has already been starting to do the MRV for its 8 sectors emissions from 2013 to start. The data has been collected since 2015. So it's been collecting to like from 2013 to now it's like 13 years data. And by doing the MRV, meanwhile, China has accumulated a lot of the data foundation. And then starting from 2017, China announced that they are going to really kick off the implementation and the build up of the national ETS, which is they are implementing the infrastructure, the capacity building, and all the relevant design elements is needed to be ready. And there's another thing happened along the way with the China national ETS establishment, which was the responsibility of managing the ETS was belonging to the NDRC, which is the National Development and Revolution Commission before the 2018. And that was managed by the climate change department attached to the NDRC. But after 2018, the central government decided to move the climate change department and also the carbon market management responsibility from the NDRC to the current managing government agency, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, which is the MEE. So this movement is actually meets the China's needs for developing the ETS, because NDRC was the one are doing a lot of planning and budgeting in China for a more from micro economic development perspective to do the planning strategy for China, and also including like the 5-year plans. But with the MEE, they are more like narrowed down towards like enforcement, local environment regulation in place to try to enforce all the regulations. So actually by like 2018, the China national ETS has already been started to implementing. So this is really actually meets the need for enforcing the data collections and enforcing the compliance for next step. So this is like a movement from the NDRC to the MEE. And then after the infrastructure built up and also the everything is ready, China actually started the trading since 2021. And in 2021 July, China started its the trading online, and then all the complementary rules for the China National has also in place, and also like I said, the ministry level the management regulation was also in place by that time. But that was like not a higher level regulation, but actually recent years, starting in like 2024, it's enforced the management decree. And also last year, the China, the State Council and also the CPC, the Central Party Committee, they jointly announced a guideline for the next 5 to 10 years development guidance for the China National ETS, which is more stronger than the legislation in China, actually. But I think this is the development for the China National ETS. But we can also, by borrowing this timeline, we can back into the pilots. We can see the details implementation in the pilots is not always like as I know, like in Thailand, the Climate Act actually is already in place, mentioning about the ETS, but or it's discussed. But like in the pilots in China National ETS, it's always not like the regulations are in place and doing the MRV, but they can happening at the same time. They're discussing the government is deciding to implement the ETS, then they were starting to do the MRV to build the data foundation, and then considering how to implement the design elements like the infrastructure, the supplement regulations at the same time. Because when a higher level regulation is really hard to be in place, you can seek more lower level, like a ministry level, municipal level regulation would be in place. That would be easier for them to do it. But definitely, like in China, the pilots, because they are like provincial or municipal city level, their regulation adoption are more easily than like the state council level regulation adoption. But definitely, it's not like you need to consider the regulation first, but still you can doing something parallelly at the same time. And after the China implement its ETS, the next phase is like the national ETS expansion and actually the operation. So for the expansion and operation, for starting from last year, actually, China has already expanded its sector to the cement, aluminum, and iron steel sector, but it's still undergoing for further expansion. They haven't been covered. The other 4 sectors are chemical, petrochemical, aviation, and papermaking, which are the 4 sectors already being announced since the beginning of the China National ETS back into like 2015. China has already been decided to covering these 8 sectors. So this also reminds us like the thresholds and the coverage should be considered in the first place, but not necessarily. You can be expanding towards narrow down, but this is really subject to the country's regulation and the expansion ability. Because like in China, for now, if we want to expand into like shipping, there's no such plan yet, like I said, but it will subject to a more work for future to if considered to expanding to shipping. But the expansion in China for the ETS is bringing a lot of benefits. It's like not only bringing more sectors, but also definitely bringing more participants in from the other sector. Previously, there's only power sector, which means their emission reduction marginal cost would be similar, and there's like lower liquidity in the carbon market. Definitely because of China only got a spot trading, the spot products in the market. And also if bringing in more sectors, it will try to increasing the liquidity when there is no other financial products yet. So that's also bringing this benefits, and also it will help exploring the effective carbon price, not only for power sector, for more other sectors, and considering the expansion. So the next step would be for the national ETS for China is considering. I actually touched a little bit yesterday about the contributing the climate goals, whether the ETS will be, because the China ETS is considering for now to implementing the cap, the absolute cap, and also considering the auction or the paid allowance allocation. So which is whether touched on the cap would be considering the contributing to the climate goal, how they will be linked. And this is the next step China would be considered, because of now, China hasn't peaked yet. So China national ETS hasn't been considered for if they in place a cap, how the cap would be contribute to the national goal, and also like I said, the further expansion. Here's the details of the China national ETS design elements. So you can screenshot it if you want. These are the facts for now with on the development, because I said a little bit at the beginning about what is designed in the China national ETS, but this is the current status. I won't touch them for now. But I just want to emphasize that China hasn't been achieved to all the design elements in the first place. It's like gradually developed from 2017 until now for making this progress. Like at the beginning, there's one thing I didn't mention about the covered greenhouse gas emissions. The greenhouse gas taps. At the beginning, China only covering the carbon dioxide, but starting since the expansion of the China national ETS, it's already been expanded to more other greenhouse gas emissions, not only the carbon dioxide. And also, let's see another track about the crediting system. Really simple. Like I said, from the 2005, it's the CDM phases, and gradually become the current CCER because of reform under the Paris Agreement and the ability for increasing more ambitious emission reduction domestically other than covered by the ETS. So now the CCER has the strategies like the sector covered by the national ETS, no matter the required compliance or considered for the MRV, all the sectors or the products cannot be developing CCR projects or methodologies. But in the future, definitely this is like because of the avoid double counting issues. But definitely for the CCR, it's also gradually developed from the policy to the infrastructure to the market launch, starting from like 2023. That's the new program. And also there is the detailed fact sheet of the CCR program. This is also the new one. It's not the prior ones. I didn't put in the prior status, like I said, for the more than 1,300 projects and also the emissions. But this is the new one, if you'd like to see it. And also, by the end, I would like to give some reflections and discussions. So for now, still, so because I received the questions from the organizer at the beginning, like they were asking how the ETS will incentivize emission reductions. But actually, in general, in concept, it could be all those elements I listed here. But in China, the incentive for the emission reduction, I think, would be the policy certainty, and also trying to be using the offset as a leverage for offset the compliance market obligations. That's like for making much more a willingness to for the project owner to develop their own CCR projects. We can see now the trend is in China national ETS, the CCR program. The CCR price is much higher than the other real VCM program credits. For now, the the CCR is around 60 RMB, which is like $8 to $9, which is much higher because this is only the reason because the CCR has the ability to offset the compliance market compliance obligation. And also regarding to in general, I believe incentivized emission reduction, for sure should be give a tightening benchmark for allocated emission allowances, and then give the companies a long policy certainty. And with the auction, could not only raise the revenues for reinvesting all the revenues to addressing climate change or to the technology renovation and helping reduce emission more, but also can helping meet the requirements from tightening the benchmark, which is allocated less allowances for them. And I would like to give a conclusion for this, and this would be a little bit suggestions. Definitely for the phased implementation, it's really important, which would be gradually when it is ready to do it. But definitely top-level design, it's a must. But like I said, the top-level design doesn't mean like pass the legislation in first place, but the top-level design is like to understand and to think through how the ETS what's the ETS role, and how the ETS are gonna be implemented, like from when to do the data collections, whether to use the grandfathering, the allowance allocation method, or using the benchmark allowance allocation method, whether you're gonna be introducing the auction first, or when you starting to consider auction, and how you're gonna control your emissions, like using absolute cap or using intensity cap. So that's the top-level design, but not necessarily the legislation, but definitely you need to consider the legislation. And then the piloting and the tailored design is really, really important. The piloting doesn't mean need to be several pilot at the same time. The piloting in the system gradually to be more mature is a piloting. And also tailored design, it's like in China. Before China, there wasn't a program used the intensity-based target. But after China implemented ETS, there is the intensity-based target for measuring the ETS performance and reducing the emissions. So I think this is kind of the model development country can follow for tailored design for their own characteristics. And also regarding like how to establishing the MSR is also can be tailored. And whether you need to borrowing, like I said yesterday, in China, there's no borrowing, but during the COVID pandemic period, China National ETS has using the borrowing for just easing the compliance obligation for all the key meeting entities during the hard time. So that is like a tailored design. So all the design elements can be, tailored. So I think this is also the best part of the ETS or the carbon market, because we're always saying the carbon market can be a tool that lower the emission reduction cost while reduce the emissions. But also the good part of the carbon market is like it has its own flexibility that can meet every country's need. So I think that's all for me. If you have questions, let's discuss. And this is this is our report actually published last year. And you can scan the QR code to download the electronic version. This is more about the China national ETS development, and also touching a little bit about the offset CCR program. But in there's several sections named as deep dive. In the deep dive section, we try to elaborate why China ETS designed the future like this, like why China ETS choosing the power sector first, or why China ETS using the intensity-based target first. So I think because of our time is limited, and this report can give you more about the hint of like designing the ETS in the future. Thank you.